Hello and welcome to the Last Word on Spurs. We are your multi-award winning Tottenham Hotspur podcast. We are back with a feature special to bring to you during this international break. Yes, we're trying to keep you inundated, keep you calm, composed for what is to come in the soap opera and the journey that is Tottenham Hotspur Football Club. I've also going to got myself a new co-host. And I've got myself a returning guest. God, it's all happening on Last Word on Spurs during this international break. Don't tell us we don't try and keep you entertained. Are you not entertained? If you're for the first time, you can find us on iTunes. We're on Spotify. We're across all major audio platforms. We're, of course, on X. We're on Instagram. We're on Facebook. And we're on Blue Sky too. Before I bring in our special guest that returns, look, a new co-host to the show, runs a fabulous Tottenham podcast, I've got to say, that gives you all different views and perspectives and offers a little bit something different, I think, in the Spurs community. I'm delighted to be welcoming, first time on the show, first of many potentially. We've got Jim from the Oh So Spurs podcast. Jim, lovely to have you join us. How are you?
I'm doing well, thanks, Ricky. It's an absolute pleasure to be on, mate. So yeah, thanks for the excited introduction there.
I'm trying, Jim. I'm trying. Look, might be a tricky season, but I'll try and keep us infused as much as I can. And also bringing back to the show a guest that we've had the pleasure of having on this show since the appointment of Ange Postecoglou, right up to date, that has told us throughout this crazy, chaotic journey under Ange, expect the unexpected, and also warned us at the very, very early stage. There's no guarantee of success. There's no guarantee it will work. I think it's fair to say we bring this man back on at a time where the Spurs fan base are quite simply under the biggest test so far of Ange Postecoglou. It's my delight to welcome back to Last Word on Spurs, author, of course, of that wonderful book that we implored you to buy, and we still implore you to buy that still, of course, Ange Postecoglou, the man, the methods, the mastery. We're delighted to welcome back author John Greechan to Last Word on Spurs. John, thanks so much for your time. Just a quiet show to will you back into.
I get the feeling, Ricky, it's like an emergency break glass. Send for Johnny to tell us that everything's going to be okay.
Punch now. Thank you so much for coming back, John. How are you first? Are you well?
Absolutely delighted to be back on, mate. Even though it means there's a crisis at Spurs. Always good to catch up with the boys.
Bless you so much. I can't remember the last time, John, you've come here and said it's not a crisis. And I'm going to double check because you've just given us a little bit of a sip there. Is that wine or Ribena, John? Do you want to confirm for the audience?
That is Ribena. Yeah, that is
It is Ribena. It is not just red
my
wine
wits
yet.
About me. Keep my wits about me, Phyllis.
I say it's not red wine yet. By the time we come towards the end of the show, it might be fully on the red wine. We might need to cut the bottles to get through it. But yeah, I mean, look, we bring you on at a time, John, where I think it's fair to say that the Spurs fan base are currently at a massive divide right now with regards to whether Ange Postecoglou is the right man for the football club. And I think the reason why this show is going to work really, really well, in my opinion, I've made really no secret of the fact that I'm pretty much at a point where I'm finding it very, very hard in my mind to see a pathway forward with regards to Ange Postecoglou. And that's what brings me lovely over to my co-host, Jim, that to be fair to him, I think has been balanced, has been reasoned, has been measured, and has maybe got a bit more patience than me, Jim. Is that fair to say in regards to Ange? And I think you've been very much of the case, I don't put words in your mouth here, that whilst it has been a damning season in terms of results and stats out there, the injuries have made a massive factor for a second season in a row as to where Spurs find themselves, right, Jim? Is that a fair analysis?
Yeah, I guess the reason perhaps I've got that patience for Ange is I feel there's been 8 years of decisions prior to Ange that have led to him having a situation that is very complex, challenging and difficult. And I feel like he's on our side in the sense that he wants to fix this. He wants this to work. And he will fight tooth and nail to do so. Whether he's the right man or not to do that, I think that's a fair argument to have. But yeah, I think I owe him a little bit of patience back personally. And I guess we'll touch on that a little bit later.
Yeah, we're certainly going to dive in. Lots of analytical stuff coming up. And I think, look, John, you've come to the point where when we're bringing you on for an international break, it obviously means Spurs have had a defeat because, you know, Spurs have not won a match before the international break since 2023 when they beat 10-man Luton back in October of that year. And it's crazy to think that in all 6 since then, we've fallen to a defeat. this one particularly obviously difficult by the fact that we go into it again where we're less stewing on yet another frustrating defeat. And, again, I mentioned that point that there's a lot of frustration amongst the Spurs fan base with regards to why a change maybe hasn't been made earlier with regards to Ange Postecoglou, where Spurs still have their best opportunity to win a European trophy for the first time since you go back to 1984. There's question marks as to whether Ange Postecoglou is still the right man to be leading the club for that trophy, given the nature of our form of results, as we obviously are still in this international break. Tottenham are 14th in terms of the Premier League table. They, at the moment, are level on points with Everton and West Ham in the joint position of 16th. Yeah. Yes, I can't believe what I'm saying. I've done this show for 7-8 years. Yes, I can't believe what the words are coming out of my mouth at the moment. They just about scraped through that Europa League round of 16 tie against AZ Alkmaar, but do face a difficult test against Eintracht Frankfurt in the quarterfinals. Look, it's been a season, John, that's been damning in terms of the results, the stats. It's been riddled with injuries. What have you quite made, John, of Postecoglou's second season in charge to date?
I don't think we can ignore the injuries, and no one would. And Ange won't let you, will he? He's got a reputation for mentioning it quite often, and as you would. I mean, it is ridiculous levels of injuries and key players, and then one comes back, and another one goes out, one comes back and goes out again. It's just been maddening for them. So do you take that into account? You also take into account, as you said, I mean, when first time I came on the show, it might not work, right? It just might not work. The Premier League is a shark-infested waters. It's brutal, with very few exceptions. Everyone's got international footballers who are going to kill you. They're going to hurt you. They're going to exploit things. So, you would say surprised, not that surprised that the second season's been a bit wobbly when you look at all the circumstances that have been around it, in terms of the injuries. If you don't have your players available, I genuinely defy any coach in the world. What are you supposed to do if you don't have your players available? And we talked off air about some of the players that have played who just they don't look like Premier League players. There's a couple of them in there. You're like, what is he doing in the Premier League? That's just now that comes down to long-term planning and how many you have. But I mean, how many can you keep on your books? Do you have 8 centre halves that are ready to step in? These are all difficult issues that go beyond the manager.
Can I just say before Jim comes in there for 1 second, John, because I'll be pressed if I don't ask you this very quickly. There'll be a lot of fans that are going to be suggesting to me, but Ricky, you've got to challenge John with relation to the players that Spurs have had available when it comes to the magnitude and the nature of the fact that we sit at the moment on 15 defeats across the Premier League season. It's 19 overall. There will be that argument out there that despite missing some key players, the reality is that it feels for a lot of fans out there that there still should have been better results given the players that have been available this season. Would you accept that from your perspective?
Yeah, without a doubt. The results should have been better. If you ask Ange, the results should have been better. Speak to people on his coaching staff, results should have been better. So that can be true, as well as they've also had a horrendous injury run, which has contributed to giving them very little leeway, and therefore little things go against you. So yes, the results should have been better. Nobody should be happy. No, I don't think anyone is happy. Nobody should be happy with the performances, the results. The difference there, I suppose, is you weigh it up. Do you still believe that this guy has what it takes to turn this round? And if not, who you hire next? That's it's a really simple thing. And I know you talk about the fan base splitting this way and that way. I mean, does Daniel Levy care that much about that? I mean, I suppose when season ticket renewals are coming out at the moment, and that's the kind of thing that might influence him. But it's been a rotten season so far, but you still are in the quarterfinals of the Europa League. I remember 1984. I'm that old. I remember sitting up watching it and going absolutely berserk when Spurs won. It was one of my favourite kind of teenage memories of watching football late at night on the old BBC, I think it was. And so, if you pulled that off, you just still say, "Oh, well, it was great then, wasn't it?"
And It's not just the injuries, though, is it, John? It's the kind of. I think you've got to sometimes try to take the Spurs glasses off and look at the amount of injuries, but where they've compounded in certain positions. So Tottenham have found themselves in a position where they didn't lose their starting centre-back. They lost their starting 2 centre-backs, then their backup 2 centre-backs, and they're not playing 1 or 2 games with a teenage midfielder at centre-back and a makeshift left-back. They are having to go for that process for 10-plus games. And you've got, with Mickey Van Ven Romero in particular, that doesn't just leave you defensively exposed. It impacts the whole system, the ability to play out the back, and if you look at Ange Postecoglou's metrics on how he plays, no one plays more short passes with that energy out the back and the pace out the back in an unrelenting and uncompromising way. So it all begins from the back, and it fails if the back doesn't have those starting key players. And I kind of look at it as well as it's not just the back, though. It's the front line as well, isn't it? Spurs lost Solanke and then the backup in Richarlison. Then they have to move Son up front, who's not a striker. So then they've got no left winger because Solanke's out. And then they've got no left wing because Odebear's out. So the whole system starts to kind of quickly become a complicated mismatch of positions. And do you think if, say, Liverpool, you said like Liverpool, you're going to have to play Harvey Elliott at centre-back for 6 weeks and you're not going to have a striker and you're not going to have Salah. You know what I mean? Do you think they're going to compound as much? Did you seen Ange ever go for another club where you've gone, wow, he's generally lost the core of his team? Or is this a unique injury crisis from your knowledge of Ange Postecoglou?
Without checking back all the records, I would say this is the worst injury crisis, partly because it's also in the toughest league. So when you're in the A-League and you've got an injury crisis and you can find your way around it. You're very right to point out, Jim, about the interconnected nature. Now, every coach will say that, but I mean, it's repeatedly, everyone I've ever spoken to about Ange and people he's worked with has said, it's such a unit, the team is such a unit. If the forwards aren't doing the off-the-ball stuff right, the on-the-ball stuff cannot work. If the defenders aren't in the right position, playing the high line, and confident enough to play the high line and play the passes, the build-up doesn't work. So there's a lot of moving parts, and he makes it very simple for players, and players understand their rotations and where they're supposed to go. But it's a complex model, and when you take parts out of it, key components out of it, then you get to the argument, which no doubt will come up, well, should he have just changed it? Should have gone, look, I don't have the players to do this. Let's change it. From speaking to players he's worked with, they believe it's a simple enough, because he makes it simple enough that it's not that difficult. You should be able to do it, but sometimes it's the mentality to do it, the bravery to do it, and it's difficult. If you've been taught to play one way, suddenly you're going in. Your style of centre half is I'm hitting the channel ball all day long. That's my safe ball all day long. And he's saying, no, don't do that. Going into midfield, out to the fullback, back to you, out the other side, out to the fullback. And you don't feel comfortable enough doing it, then that comes down to the man management side of it. Doesn't do you think, right, this guy's never going to get this, we're just going to have to change the way we play?
Can I just come back in on that point? And Jim's more than welcome to follow on from this point. I think what you just picked up on there, John, is one thing that I know a lot of fans that I speak to on a daily basis or weekly basis have that frustration where it feels like when you're watching the games, whether it's at the stadium, home and away, that it feels that there's, how do I put this without being disrespectful? It feels like there's, and again, Jim might disagree on this, so I've been intrigued to get Jim's thoughts as well. It feels like when it's in game, it feels like it's very much on the players to almost work out what they need to do. And there's very little, I feel, interaction at times on the touchline with regards to Postecoglou and his coaching staff, that when it feels like the going is getting tough, it feels like there's very little instruction that is coming from that bench to be able to alter or change a game. And it's down to the players to find the solution. And I just wonder, because again, being at the game for the Bournemouth game where, again, I'm just plucking a manager, Iriola, for example, he was almost, it felt at times in that game, coaching his players through the game where different points were having, different circumstances happening in the game. He was almost coaching them through it. Do you feel there's an emphasis, John, just on the players under Ange Postecoglou, wherever he's been, to almost have that trust in them to find the solutions out on the pitch rather than need to be given instruction throughout the game? Is that a fair point?
I think they'll get... Listen, you work all week on it, don't you? That's the point. You work all in from his point of view, he works a year or 2 years on it, getting them to understand what to do in situations, how to play it, how to draw teams out of position, how to exploit the spaces, when to press, when not to press, the triggers and everything. It's not thrown together, so he doesn't need to do a lot during the game. And I understand. I've had this for, like, I can remember this with umpteen different managers over the years. Oh, he doesn't do enough on the touchline. You know, when they're losing, when they're winning, oh, he's so calm on the touchline. Look at Ancelotti there, just raising his eyebrow. You know, it's like, way before Ange, the guy Wim Jansen at Celtic at the start of the year, he doesn't do enough on the touchline. He doesn't get involved. He doesn't give any information. They won the league. Nobody cared then, right? So I think it can be a little bit of a show on the touchline at times. Another one, Martin O'Neill used to do it for show sometimes, bounce up and down like a mad case and charge around the place to almost show the players he was on their side. They've all got different styles. In terms of the problem solving, you will find that the coaching staff believe they've given them everything they need. And then they'll give them bits of information. There will be information going on. It just doesn't always seem like he's balling and shouting and working them like they're Subbuteo players at times.
John, you cover a lot of managers, and being in the industry and being a journalist as well. And I had some feedback from Anton McElhone, who worked with Poch, Redknapp and AVB, and Postecoglou at Celtic. So he worked at Spurs and Celtic, and I put this question to him on, that's feedback Ange Postecoglou gets, is he's hands off in training and all those things. His feedback was, so was Redknapp, so was AVB, and so was Pochettino. Managers don't have time to be there 5 days or 7 days a week with the player, telling them exactly what to do. They hire very expensive coaches on very big wages who they believe are better than they are at those very nuanced tasks. And they go, I trust you. And they kind of take a bird's eye view. They collect feedback from these people at the end of the day, the likes of Ryan Mason, who's done brilliantly on his coaching badges, to get feedback. And then they try and instruct that onto the players. And whether the players can typically follow up on those instructions often is simply down to how good players are. And that his belief is, if you have good enough players, pretty much any system can work. I'm interested to pass that feedback kind of back to you on Ange and see if, what you thought of that.
Yeah, he's probably developed over the years, because when he was younger and at smaller clubs, he had to be very hands-on to everything because he was doing everything. You know, he was a chief scout. He was involved in the sports science. He was doing everything. So it's a hell of a leap of faith to take when you're a manager, isn't it? When you think about it. And I've spoken to a lot of different managers over the years who do it different ways. I've known managers who don't go near training, like literally will like say to their assistants, this is what we're going to do on Saturday when we're playing this team. I want to attack down the left wing and I want to do this. And we need to watch out for that. Go put together training. And when the coach would come back to them and say, I'm doing this, he'd say, well, I don't want to know. I trust you. You do the training. I'll pop out and watch a little bit and see who's in good form. But to have that faith to do that, other coaches are just obsessive with every detail. He's got, I know Nick Montgomery, who's on his coaching staff there from his time at Hibs, a really sharp thinker, very much in tune with what Ange wants to do. That's the main thing, isn't it? You have to bring in people who aren't going to deliver contradictory messages. And then, as you say, it comes down to the ability of the players. We all see it. And I coach, as it were, you can tell players that have played at the higher level, because you don't need to tell them to do something. Sometimes they just do it because they've played at a higher level. They've had better coaching. They know what it is.
I mean, like I say, at the moment where we are with Postecoglou, and again, I appreciate that when you're on a podcast and you're covering Tottenham, things can always rapidly change when you dare make a suggestion or put a statement out there. All the current indications are that Tottenham do want to get until the end of the season before reviewing the campaign and coming to a decision over Postecoglou's future. However, results are likely to dictate how the club approaches the situation. I said at the top of the show, Spurs do currently sit 14th in the Premier League table after suffering their 15th defeat in their last 29 league campaigns this season against Fulham. It is already the most losses in a league campaign in 16 years for Spurs, and there are still 9 matches to go. Tottenham still have to go to the likes of Anfield, Stamford Bridge, obviously, of course, after the international break, the London Stadium. Only the bottom 4 have fallen to defeat in more games than Spurs this season, and only Southampton and Leicester have lost more away from home. So outside that bottom 4, Postecoglou's side have accumulated the fewest Premier League points in the 2025, let's say, year so far. And a damn example of just really how they have fallen away. Spurs now trail Bournemouth by, in 10th, 9 points heading into the final 9 league games of the season. I have to ask you, John, are you surprised that Ange Postecoglou remains as the Spurs head coach, given the damning nature of results and stats that have been surrounding this last year or so?
I think given the track record of Daniel Levy, you would say yes, but then he's almost benefiting from that, isn't he? The fact that there was such a high churn rate of managers that there's almost that, I can't do this again. This will begin to look really ridiculous.
This 18-month cycle you refer to, yep.
Yeah, I can't get rid of another manager because then people start looking at me. So from what I gather, and football's a gossip-ridden business, and there hasn't been much coming out about players not being happy or not liking the manager or any of that, and that's a huge element. He had to face down. You go back to the Brisbane Roar, right at the start of the Roar-Salona thing. He just changed the entire face of Australian and then Asian football with how they played. He went in there and threw out a whole load of expensive, big-name, popular fans. Popular with the fans, players, and had to face that down. Half of them went out and got, started becoming pundits and commentators and were outside the tent pissing back in while he was building that. Japan, I think we talked about this before. I mean, he had a complete player revolt. They were up to the translator saying, this guy doesn't know what he's doing, he doesn't understand Japanese football. He had to face that down, turnover. But we haven't heard anything even approaching that. Now, if there were cracks in that squad, this is exactly the kind of run where players would be looking to get the message out. It ain't my fault. Manager's a dud. Can't stand, But there doesn't seem to be much of that coming out there, which I would think probably, if your job as man management is part of it, then he's got something good there. He's still building something that you would hope that, maybe that comes into his thinking.
It seems to be that's the case, because we've seen it before with Conte, Mourinho, Nuno. Except the first thing that comes out from journalists, John, maybe you can explain to us why. I assume these are deliberate ploys from clubs, but it comes out with these players are unhappy with training. This player has concerns, and I feel like that's probably agents. Maybe you tell us. Actually, can I ask you the question? Do clubs kind of give you journalists a little bit of a tip off when, or sorry, not clubs, agents and players when they're kind of wanting to engineer a change? Because we don't see that with Ange, which to me says there's still a vision they're buying into here.
Yeah, and, it does come out. It comes out partly because, as I say, football is a tremendous business for gossip, which is why it's great fun being a journalist about it, because you do get, and it comes from players, friends, or players, agents, or sometimes players themselves. You bump into people, and the conversations I've had over the years with put it this way, training ground complaints come up really quickly. They come out quickly. If something is not right, you hear it. And I've heard over the years, too much shape work, and we're burst because we don't have enough fitness, or it's too much fitness work, we have no idea on the tactical side. These things come out very quickly. It's just the way it is. But if things are unhappy, in particular during a losing run.
It's an important point you bring up there, I think, Jim, because, like you said there, we've seen it under so many different managers that it does feel that the players almost sometimes engineered the respective managers' exits when the players have almost had enough and down tools. You go back, as you said there, Jim, to the likes of Pochettino, where towards the end there was a complaint over the intensity of the training, through to Nuno, where they're unhappy about that, through to Conte, where that was deemed as being very repetitive. And it's interesting because, again, a lot of the players have really defended Ange when they've come out into press conferences. And I think there's been that narrative around the fact, but they're not going to come out and throw the manager under the bus. There is that argument. But at the same time, the players also don't have to simply praise him if they don't want to. So it feels like there's been a case where the players have sometimes out of their way gone to deliberately defend the manager, which is an interesting one. And I kind of what brings into play what was quite fascinating was that for those that haven't seen it, Jed Spence has done a recent podcast with Rio Ferdinand as part of his channel on there. And it's really intriguing where he was actually asked the question, Jed, how much responsibility is given to the players when things aren't going right to almost take it upon themselves to maybe sit in for 5 minutes or sit in for 10 minutes and almost try and measure the way the game is going. And I thought what was fascinating is for those that haven't seen that interview yet, and please, I implore you to go and listen or watch it, is that Jed said, well, no, Ange would absolutely hate that. Ange wants us to stick to our principles. And the reality is that if things don't go well, as long as we are sticking to what the manager is telling us to do, he will never be angry with us, which is fascinating because at the same time, Rio Ferdinand turned around and said, well, under Fergie, he brought us in as players to almost, smell when things aren't going right, to be able to sit in for 5-10 minutes and manage a game. And I think that's been one of the things, John, to not go too far off piece, that I think for some fans out there, they have really struggled with that at certain times in the game where it's been quite chaotic and crazy. I go back to the Chelsea game at home where Spurs were 2-0 up. You could just sense this game was absolutely neurotic, where it just needed a 5-10 minute period of a bit of calmness. And you were hoping that some of the players would be able to cotton on to that fact and almost try and settle things down. Yet it does feel it's kind of almost all or nothing with regards to the way Ange does want to play the football. I just wonder, do you feel there needs to be more of an onus on the players when it comes to being able to smell or being able to understand where there needs to be a period where you sit in and dig in for 5 minutes? Because I found it quite fascinating that Jed's response back to Rio Ferdinand was, that's the way the manager wants us to play, and we can't deviate away from that. But I just feel like when you're good players and you've got to the level you have done in the Premier League, you can smell where a game is not going to plan, and you would use your own kind of intel and intelligence to know we've got to sit in and dig in for 5-10 minutes. It doesn't all have to come through the manager. Is that a fair point, John?
I think it's a reasonable point, but I mean, Fergie had Roy Keane, who could go to Turin, against Juventus, and just win the game by giving his play, and by being so smart, a rare footballing IQ on the pitch, who knew how to when the game needed this, when the game needed that. It's a rare player that can do that, who can actually, figure out, because the last thing he wants to give them is an excuse, right? Because if he turns around and says, listen, if it gets a bit ropey during the game, just knock it up the park for 5 minutes. His philosophy is, if he does that, then the first thing they will say, they'll look at him and go, oh, so you don't believe in this then? So he's, it's all about how he believes in the model. This is how we win. This is how you don't just beat the best team, you be the best team. You build a team that can win everything, that can totally dominate even the best teams in the world. This is how you do it. If you give players an out, if you give them an excuse, if you give them any kind of flicker of, well, obviously in that situation, you would just shell it up the park and don't worry about it. That's a crack in this kind of edifice of confidence that they have to have in what they're doing. And you said it all along, and he needs converts. He needs complete and utter converts. He doesn't want conscripts in there who are just doing it to keep the manager happy. He wants people who understand it, believe in it 100%.
And I had a question though on that, and there's been a difference in the type of player Ange has brought in at Spurs versus his time at other clubs. And obviously, I didn't know the players on the training pitch. We make assessments of personalities as armchair supporters from our armchairs and are very stoic about those opinions. But it appears that what Ange did really well at those other clubs was he brought in leaders, like true combative leaders on the pitch. He would, and he spoke about this before, he would sacrifice 10% of ability for someone who has the right personality mix. But at Spurs, I feel like he doesn't have those leaders, and we've signed quite a few players. Do you think that's through? Do you think that is the case? Could that be down to just working under a different recruitment model? Tottenham's focus on younger players, because I find it interesting. we as a fan base, it's quite natural to, on one hand, kind of give kind of negative connotations towards our transfer policies as a football club and all that kind of thing, but then also kind of call out the manager for being the one who has to handle that and has to deal with the downsides of that. If you just look at the England squad, there's a reason why a world-class coach like Thomas Tuchel is bringing Jordan Henderson back in the squad. It's certainly not because of his pace or his ability. It's his leadership. It's the only principle bringing in, right? That's how important those leaders are for managers. But yeah, I'm intrigued to see, do you think that's the case at Spurs, that he hasn't been given those leaders on the pitch to help him take things over the line?
Yeah, it's a possibility, and it's more than anything, you look for players who will fit into the culture and who will buy into it. And he said that repeatedly. And I think we discussed this before, Ricky. We were on one of his oldest friends is now involved in blue chip recruitment for chief executives for companies all over the world. And he still uses Ange's philosophy at times when he's delivering lectures all over the world on when you're recruiting for staff, because it was about how you fit into the culture, and he would take all that. In terms of, you look at the youth, and that's partly because of the injury thing, and partly that's what you've got left. It's hard to find leaders in that situation when you're getting dropped into the team, played out of position. It'll be interesting to see. I think that's another thing that's probably saving him a little bit at the moment, that people would want to see, well, what do we do in the summer? What can we bring in those two players who we think will make the difference as? So you're still looking for probably another striker? Are we on that? Because is Richarlison, is he?
Yeah, I mean, it's a fair point. Is it probably I think striker? This is it with Tottenham's recruitment. I mean, Jim touched upon it there. There's been an influx of some really good youth prospects that are being bought, but at the same time, it does feel that, as you touched upon, back to the point you've both made, that there does seem to be a real lack of real genuine leaders. And whatever people think about these players, Lloris, Dyer, Højbjerg, these guys racked up a number of huge amount of appearances for their respective countries where they were seen as leaders for their respective nations. And the thing with Tottenham at the moment is that whilst they've got a really good core of good youngsters coming through, it does feel there's a real lack of real dominant leadership on the pitch. I know Sonny, again, he's the captain of the football club. I think Sonny leads by example. He's not a vocal leader. And again, trying to hype back to this, but for those that have seen that interview with Jed Spence that has dropped with Rio Ferdinand, he almost, again, kind of doubled down that fact that when it's the Spurs dressing room, the likes of Maddison leads by example with the way he plays, but there's very few vocal leaders in the Spurs squad. But we're coming to a point now, John. I mean, look, you've been in the game for such a long time. Football isn't what it used to be. There's a real lack of whether people like him or don't like him. The likes of a John Terry or the likes of a Roy Keane, as you touched upon there. A lot more captains now almost seem to be leading by example. We don't seem to have a lot of vocal leaders now in the game. And I just look at this young Spurs squad that at certain times, in my opinion, needs direction on the pitch. And I think when I will look back at Ange's tenureship after he's gone, I think one of the biggest failings will be, there'll be a question as to whether he was up to the standard managing Tottenham, but another thing will definitely be the recruitment in terms of the players they brought in for him. Because I do feel, and I've said this on a number of occasions, like many Spurs managers throughout their time here, going back to Pochettino, through to Mourinho, to Conte, to Nuno, now with Postecoglou, I feel that the respective recruitment team have failed Ange Postecoglou by not giving him the calibre of players in order to be able to make his system work. And I know there's some out there that feel no matter what players he would have at Tottenham, this would never work. But I think what you can't get away with at the same time is that whatever you think about Ange's period at Tottenham, we have seen games where his system has worked. But the reality is, in my opinion, we just haven't got the players to be able to consistently play the way Ange wants to play. And again, I know many will point to the injury crisis, the way the players are being trained, but you've seen it through your own eyes, John. You've seen Ange Postecoglou win trophies wherever he's been. You can question the leagues that he's won them in, but the reality is that when he's had a group that he believes are capable of doing the job, they've done the job. So I think a massive part of maybe the failing of maybe Postecoglou's time at Spurs, which still isn't over, I think many will look at the point of recruitment, John, which I know we spoke about a lot on previous shows with you.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of leadership, it's really interesting because he found a great leader when he arrived at Celtic in Callum McGregor. who was Celtic captain. And then a lot of people didn't think Callum was a natural leader because Scott Brown had been, eyes bulging and fist raging. And McGregor is a very different type of leader. He's still the captain, an incredible professional, loud enough when he needed to be loud enough. But I think you set the example every day in training, set the example every day, every time he played about 600 games a year. He never missed a match. It seemed to be forever. So sometimes you find someone in the club, sometimes you need to bring someone in. There was obviously some holes left in the squad. I mean, we've talked before, but when you lose Harry Kane right at the start and all that happened, and then maybe they just rolled with it through that first season, and kind of got through on a lot of other different things going right. Because we discussed this before, he probably didn't expect it to start so quickly and go so well at the start. Now he's having the slump. There's maybe just been a little delayed thing. In terms of the recruitment, I know you say that people would say, "Oh, it wouldn't matter. It couldn't work at Spurs." I think Spurs is one of the few clubs where it can work because of the tradition and the history and the way the fans love the football. That this was when he jumped at this job. It wasn't just because we discussed this. This is the Premier League. This is English football. This is the mothership calling him home. The little boy that grew up watching the big match on TV in Australia and Melbourne. So that was a big thing. But it was Spurs. I mean, it was Spurs. It was, glory, glory, Tottenham Hotspur. I'm going to go there and I'm going to play like this, and it's going to be fabulous. So it's one of the few places in the English Premier League where it could work. It could work. I mean, it does need the backing. It does, and again, you're such fine margins. You take away those, you 5-6 injuries, whatever it is, and then everyone's going to struggle. It's just he's probably struggled more than most. It's just no one can get around it. It's been incredibly disappointing. There's still plenty. I think the fact that there's something to salvage from this season. Go and win the Europa League. Go and finish strongly in the league. Get yourself to the summer, and then you come back to this. It seems every transfer window is it. What are the club doing? Are they going to sign another 22-year-old? Are they going to go out and compete for, an international captain? Are they going to bring in somebody who's got this? You're just going to go to one of the other clubs in England and take their best player because we're Tottenham Hotspur and we're going to do that.
It's fascinating stuff. Look, we're going to squeeze in our first break of the show for our listeners and audio. We have got nearly over 3,000 of you that are watching the show live. Thanks so much, as always, for the incredible support for the show. We do appreciate it. Like I say, it's an intriguing time to bring, of course, John on, where, as I've said, from those that are obviously watching the show live and can see from the comments, there's definitely a very much mixed view with regard, probably more than mixed view with regards to where people do stand on Ange Postecoglou. But we love to have these discussions, when we have the opportunity to break away from covering the games, week to week. These are where kind of really intriguing conversations take place around why maybe things haven't worked, and is there a way to salvage what, as we know, has been a really terrible season from a domestic perspective. There is still that Europa League to play for, which, I mean, I've been asked a question here, I've got to say, which I will just quickly answer. I've been asked by a fellow contributor listener here, Ricky, if Ange wins the Europa League, would you still want a new manager? It's an interesting point. I think, I think if Tottenham win the Europa League, I don't think they can sack Ange Postecoglou. But at the same time, I'll let Jim come in this as well. I think this is, for me personally, just my opinion. I think I've seen enough for me in the 18 months from a domestic perspective that I don't see enough to suggest or show me that even if we do get a trophy on board, we are going to be able to try and consistently iron out the Premier League form. And look, maybe that's a big statement for me to make. Again, I can only view football from what I've seen. I don't want to age people, whatever. Obviously, as a fan, I've been around football for a long, long time. I'm not a coach. I'm not a manager. I'm not a journalist. I'm only a fan. So I can only view from what I'm seeing. And I just feel, for me, I haven't seen enough progression when it comes to individual players from maybe what I've seen with previous managers. That's not saying that Postecoglou won't work elsewhere, because he's worked elsewhere and won wherever he's been. And I think what's great about this show is the yin to my yang is Jim on here, where I know, Jim, for you, I think you said that you would ideally like to see him being maybe given the summer window to see if he was to bring in maybe a certain different caliber of players, what it could look like. Is that fair?
Yeah, the way I look, firstly, I can completely understand where we see loads of comments in here, right? Like, get him out, 16th is unacceptable, 14th is unacceptable. And they're completely right. I can't turn around to any Spurs fan and go, haha, you are wrong. You should just accept that Spurs are 14th and you should take it on the chin. And therefore that makes you some kind of bad fan. I think you're bloody brilliant fans if you stand up and say that's not acceptable, because you are the type of fans that hold the club accountable to high standards. So I'm not going to war with anyone who disagrees with me on that front. I just personally feel that Postecoglou's situations come from the several situations coming to head at once. And that was 8 years of poor decision making. That was trying to first salvage a squad because Harry Kane and Son were in it. So going to get pragmatic managers who went against the Tottenham way, and asking fans to sit patiently whilst they sat through a Jose Mourinho era, they sat through a Nuno era, then they were told to be patient again and sit through a Conte era, then they were told to be patient and wait to the end of the season until Stellini had seen out his bit, and then everything was going to be fine. And even before that, Spurs fans were told, wait for this shiny new stadium, sorry about what happened with Poch, we'll have the money then, things will turn around soon. So they've had all this period of being told to wait. And in amongst all that wait was no vision in the recruitment. We didn't have that recruitment structure we have now. And then Ange comes in and goes, whoa, this is a bit of a mess, isn't it? At least I've got Harry Kane. And we go, no, you don't. Bye. And he goes, so I've got a team that had peak Kane and Son in that came 8th. That was probably 14th, 15th best team in the league without those players. And he's probably overachieved in his first year, and everyone's gotten excited and gone, finally, the wait's over with their first 10 games. We're on the up. And now everyone's being told to wait again. So I can't blame anyone for being like, I'm not waiting anymore. Can we just get in some sensible, steady Eddie manager, maybe literally Eddie Howe, people, he's long gone now, just to get us back to like that top 6, solidify things, and we can build from that. I get that. I can see why people want it with all their hearts. But in my head, another 6 months for the first time ever to see a project through properly, to give someone the tools to say, let's see if you can actually do it all the way through. 6 months in the grand scheme of things is nothing, but it feels like an eternity as a football fan. It really does. And I say this as a season ticket holder of 15 years, but I think we will know for sure. If you give him one more summer and you say you've got 6 months now to show that there's a meaningful uptick on the way and things are clicking into place, you've got your players and results are dramatically improving, we will know for sure whether this project works or not. If we pull the plug now, there will still be probably a minority, but there'll still be a significant chunk of Spurs fans saying we should have seen that through. And then they won't give the next manager the backing that one needs, because they'll go, I never wanted this one. I wanted the last one to get a chance. And we go back through the proverbial loop of Spurs fans at each other's necks. And I just want to see our fan base unite, because I think we've all got one thing in common. And the only reason we get frustrated at each other is because we all want success so much. But we've just got different views of how to get there. And it gets into this tribalism of like, oh, if you want Ange gone, you're toxic. But if you want Ange, you're an idiot because we're 14th. And I'm like, maybe there is a happy medium in the middle here. And for the sake of 6 more months, can we just see that happy medium play out? Just to see. And if he doesn't work, I'll be all in on the new guy.
Yeah. So just to clarify on that point, Jim, you're saying that even if he wasn't to win the Europa League, you still like to give him the summer and see the start of next season. Is that what you're saying?
I'd have to see some improvement in the league performances, though, because players have come back now and there's 10 games to run at it, right? I'd have to see improvements. But what I'm saying is football is, and I don't like looking at things in isolation and being like, yeah, but Ipswich at home. If Tottenham won, if Tottenham lost against Arsenal, Chelsea, Liverpool and City home and away every season, but won all the other games, so they win all the games they should on paper, we'd have 8 Premier League titles. But football just doesn't work that way. It is a game of every team in the top 6, well, the vast majority will lose against a team in the bottom 5 each season. That is just, it's just football. It is what it is. That's just part of the parcel. So I kind of just in this position now where I feel like if he loses to Eintracht Frankfurt, but we play really well and we give it a good shot, I don't think that's why you sack him. I just think if Spurs come back from this break now and we somehow come back from Stamford Bridge with something, which we never do, even a point, then we beat Southampton, then we get something or we play well against Frankfurt, I'm suddenly thinking come on, that's progression, right? We're still 14th, but we're seeing something to maybe go, give them more time. But we come back, we get walloped by Chelsea, lose to Southampton at home, crash out the Europa League. Okay, I can see why people are going, Jim, you're a madman. Get him out my club. I'm not sitting through 6 months while I sit on a lonely hill with a flag going, maybe one more month. So, yeah.
I mean, I will just add this point. John, you've only had to suffer 18 months so far in terms of the Spurs fan base, and I keep bringing you on and you think, oh God, Ricky, please leave me alone. But do you get it, John? I mean, I suppose when you look back at Daniel Levy's tenureship at Tottenham as being the chairman, you go back to when he sacked Martin Yo at half-time. I'm not sure if you remember that against Getafe in a Europa League tie. He sacks Pochettino just 5 months after reaching the Champions League final, despite not spending a penny for 518 days. He sacks Jose Mourinho 5 days before a cup final. He sacks Antonio Conte when Spurs are sat 4th in the Premier League, with the game before that chance to go up to 3rd. I know for some fans out there, they're absolutely bewildered how Postecoglou has been afforded so much time, given the fact, as I've said, he's had 15 defeats in the Premier League alone, with still 9 games to go, where Spurs could break their own record in that. They've had 19 so far this season. I know, again, Daniel Levy, you've said yourself, you can't really second guess the man, but comes to a point you said there, John, where at some point he has to back someone.
Yeah.
Has he backed the wrong horse, John? I mean, again, I know you love Pochettino, Postecoglou, but it's been a crazy tenureship under Enoch and Levy.
Yeah, it has been. Although, Jim Radcliffe thinks they're model owners. If you hear what he's saying, he's looking at them going, I like some of that. I know. Making money every year.
Yeah.
And I get, Jim put it beautifully, because fans they see a team every week, okay? They know it far better than anyone just popping their head in or watching on TV. They see the little stuff that happens. They see the body language. They're not fooled by things. If someone sees all that and decides, I want this guy out, that's an honestly held opinion, and go with it, right? Just you're absolutely more than entitled to that. It's what makes you a fan. You pay your money, you go in there, you take your choices. It gets ugly when there's arguments back and forth over it, and that's because everyone cares about it. I think last time I was on here, I was getting a lot of stick on social saying, you're just trying to flog your book. That's all you tried to flog book. I'm going to put this on record. I don't know if there's any copies left of the 2nd edition. I don't think there are, actually. I think it's sold out because of this program. So I genuinely don't have any vested interest. I think I've had every penny I'm ever going to get out of that book. The publishers don't tend to tell you these things, but I'm pretty sure
there'll be but surely, John, if they win the Europa League, there's got to be a 3rd edition, surely.
I don't want to do that.
I can't write anymore. I can't do anymore.
I'm not sure I could go through it. Great fun. Yeah, that would be lovely. Yes, yeah. And he'd be able to put the trophy on, get the picture in the front.
Absolutely,
that would sell pretty well.
Absolutely.
In this season, but yeah, it's not at some point, I get the feeling just from the outside, you're looking at Levy stuff. Well, I better stick with somebody, and I might as well stick with a guy whose track record shows. It's not just a track record of, he was okay here, but then he failed there. He was okay here. It's been pretty much constant success since his first breakout of football and coming back to Brisbane. It's been success since then, and you inevitably get that. But it was only Australia. But it was only Japan. It was only Scotland. But there's some merit in that. We understand that the Premier League is brutal. It's so hard, and it's coming back to the very first show I did with you. I said the Premier League is so hard. It's that this is going to be so hard for him. But I think we said at the time, the stadium needed seatbelts fitted because it was just going to be, a roller coaster from start to finish. I said at the time as well, repeatedly, I feel like I've said this, people saying, he's going to change this, he's going to change that. He used the line in the book. It's like Jerry Lee Lewis in the Great Balls of Fire biopic. He says, it's like, if I'm going to hell, I'm going playing a piano. Right? That's his way. He's like, if I am going to get sacked, I am going to do it trying to play this type of football that I've believed in my entire life. Since Ferenc Puskas was my coach. And I was growing up watching these brilliant teams that my dad loved and learning that football. That's how I'm going to do it. The worst thing you could do is go out and say, well, I'll tell you what, I'm gonna be like George Graham's Spurs. Now I remember that period, right? I'm gonna be like George's Spurs. For for the last 10 games of this season and just sneak us some points here and there and try and protect my job and then get sacked anyway because people are like, man, the football shit.
Yeah,
I think
because
on top of that, you're losing games and the football's rubbish.
But I think back on the point you mentioned there, I think a key point you mentioned there, John, and I think just to be fair to those that are going week in and week out at the moment, I think we haven't really seen what is termed as Ange ball for quite a long time consistently. And I think that's what has really maybe got some fans down. Definitely these last 3-4 months where I'm going to quote what Ange said here, and this might upset a few that I know there's some really big Ange Postecoglou fans watching this show at the moment. Ange did say that when we get our players back, this is Ange's words, we will be an outstanding team. Now, you can argue that he's not had Solanke, Romero, Van der Ven back for quite a huge amount of time. But the problem is that since those players have come back, we haven't really seen Ange ball being played how we saw at points where things were looking quite positive. I think that is what has got some fans down. I think, again, the nature of the performance against AZ Alkmaar on the first leg is where I think a lot of the big backers from Postecoglou were starting to lose some hope. And I think another thing that has maybe grated on some fans, not all fans, John, and again, you'll know him quite well from, again, how he handled the media out in the respective countries that he's been at, is that when it comes to the English media, there's been different suggestions about how he's handled the English media. There's some that maybe find him quite arrogant. There's some that maybe find him quite dismissive. How would you say he's handled the English media, John? Is that, again, just kind of an apples and pears scenario, depending on kind of the culture that you're with at that given point in time and also the results? Because there's one thing that you know about Ange Postecoglou. He does not like to talk after a defeat. The head is down. I know people argue that he's been interviewed by his shoes. But he's hurting in that moment, and it's a very, very soft voice spoken after games in the press conferences where, again, it's all very different when they win. Is that what is maybe also working against him, maybe not having that camaraderie that we saw in the first 10 games? Or will you tell me that, John, that is dictated by results? He cares passionately about winning, and when he's not winning, he's not happy and he's under pressure.
Yeah, I remember him telling us once that he'd arranged friends to come up to Glasgow, come over from Australia to Glasgow, and him and his wife, and they were going to go out, and they lost, and he didn't go out. I mean, they'd come all the way from Australia. They had dinner plans on the Saturday night, and he was like, I'm not going out. And his wife was like, are you serious? He's like, I'm not going out. I'll be rotten company. So he's obsessive with it, and they have to be. I mean, geez, who's it said it? You know, if you're not obsessed, if you're in the game and you're not obsessed with it, then you're a fake, right? You have to be absolutely 100% with it. In terms of his demeanor, listen, it always seemed a bit odd at the start that there was this fascination with Ange, with his, oh mate, listen, you know, and this is who we are, and type thing. And it became this kind of thing that he couldn't control almost. He was playing up to it a bit. But you're going to get, it's eternally true of the media. We get bored with things. We get bored with the thing. Well, so what else are you going to do? I've seen the juggling act. Get on the unicycle now, right? So there's that element of it. But also, I mean, you're going to see the same manager again. Oh, what's he going to say today? No, it's injuries, mate. And yeah, you kind of get a bit dull, kind of dulled to it.
And like sometimes just because things are boring doesn't mean they're not true. And the repetitive narrative around injuries is boring, and it doesn't sell papers anymore. It's just boring. And there's definitely a merit to be said in the media that everyone wants a simple answer to a complex problem. That's what everyone's looking for. That's how you fix it. And everyone goes, look, I told you. And it gets shared through infinity, through all the different networks and social platforms, everything else to kind of get it done. But on the fan topic, John, I'm intrigued. Look, I do think there's been a tension between Postecoglou and our away fans in particular. Yeah. And I'm a season ticket holder of 15 years, but I don't travel away, maybe once, twice a season. So the fans that do it home and away, full respect to you guys and girls, amazing. But there's definitely been they're typically the biggest protectors of a manager. And it's the first time I've seen it where they've been probably some of the biggest critics of a manager, and they still go every week and cheer the team on. I'm not criticizing them in any shape or form. But there's been a constant kind of sparring going on between Ange and them. And the players seem to have gone and backed Ange in that fight as well. And that's seen me see brilliant fans who travel home and away for years and years and years say, I don't even want Vicario in a Spurs shirt anymore. don't care that he's good. He's on Ange's side, kind of telling us we're wrong. Does not understand how much we go through and how much we've been through. Have you ever seen this before, where there's been that prickly kind of atmosphere? Because I noticed Ange in his speech at Celtic when he won the treble, it was all about, you believed in me from the start, and this is for you because you were a part of my journey and you stuck with me when I had my doubters. That was kind of his speech, basically. But at Spurs, he kind of seems to insinuate he hasn't, in his view, perhaps had that for the whole way. And maybe that's because he's not aware of the journey that we've had to go through to get to this point and all the mess we've been through and why we're so frustrated. But have you seen it before with a club? The Socceroos, maybe? He had a bit of a prickly...
Yeah, a little prickly relationship with the media at times. And I've not seen this specific thing with the away fans. It just wasn't something that came up, and all the time I was writing about him and down in Melbourne or anything. It is interesting, and he probably should be a little bit more understanding. There's a lot of emotional scar tissue with Spurs fans. You know, you just put it, this is generations of feeling like,
yeah, absolutely,
we're having, it's like Charlie Brown having the football pulled away at the last minute all the time. You know, oh, we're finally going to get there. Everything's going to be great, and you know, end up on your backside again. It's difficult. From what I gather from the bits I've read about it and heard about it, it's he didn't mind the criticism so much. Sometimes if somebody goes a little bit over the score with the person or the language,
yeah.
His argument, mate, just go and calm yourself down a bit. But unfortunately, you know, been in football a long time, and that can come across as patronising when it doesn't, not intended to be. But calm down is the worst thing you can say to someone when they're absolutely losing it at times. You know, and it's like, calm.
Telling your other half, it's not a big deal, chill out.
Yes, it's only a game. Oh, what?
You know what, on this point, though, I think this disconnect that Jim has brought up, it feels that it's come back, John. And we asked you about it at the time. You know, when we faced Man City, which obviously, of course, meant if Tottenham fans were going to, on that game, kind of, you know, I say give the game to City, but the reality is obviously that would have stopped Arsenal winning the title. And after that, as we remember that game, Ange said that there's, you know, some fragility both inside and outside the football club. I don't think he could comprehend, even in a one-off game, the fact that some of his own fans of inside the football club, and in terms of Tottenham fans, didn't want to win that game. He just couldn't rationalise that or understand that. And I think when you look back at his time at Tottenham, whenever this comes to an end, for me, that would be kind of the first dent that kind of did occur with the Spurs fan base, where for that one-off game, he just didn't get it. And, you know, again, it's interesting because, again, I mean, look, you've seen him in the most passionate of derbies in the Rangers and Scotland, you know, the old firm. I mean, they don't get more passionate than that. I look back and harper back to that time where I just think it was just a bit of a misstep from Ange. And he actually did later down the line say he maybe didn't understand or maybe got that wrong. But I think fans don't forget. And I just wonder where you've got this accumulation now, whereas Jim has touched upon, he had the row last week at Craven Cottage, which what I'm led to believe was a Fulham fan, not a Tottenham fan. You go before that, there was the situation at Bournemouth away where, again, there was confrontation with the fans. I don't think it's great for a manager, John. I'd be intrigued to get your point on this, that when form isn't great, you just can't argue with fans. You know, I know, again, he's a passionate man. He cares about his football. He loves to win. He wants to win. But I just don't think it's doing him any favours right now, John, having those altercations. Yeah. It makes it worse. It just doesn't come across great.
Every manager's playing the exact same game, is that the credits in the bank and the debits in the bank, aren't they? So you credits and winning and things that keep the fans happy in the debit. So, and the worst thing you want is to have a whole load of, and things. So, and he did this. And he fell out with and he didn't understand that we didn't want Arsenal to win the league. And because that can be the thing that when the results aren't good enough, that can be the thing that just tips it over the edge for a fan base, but also, and then eventually for a club. And we've seen it with, I've seen it with managers over the years, and it's like, there's been something has happened, and you think that might come back to haunt him if he doesn't win this. And, you know, sometimes they'll just go on and win the title, win the cup, whatever it is, and you go, well, that's fine. And you give it a year, everyone's forgotten about that. But there seems to be there's a horrible pile-up of things that fans want to pay attention to as well. And it becomes the and there's about 6 of them on top of, and we've just lost Eintracht Frankfurt.
Can I just come before Jim comes back in and ask you a question around the Europa League? What I want to ask you, John, is just how much do you think he regrets maybe doubling down on the fact that he always wins a trophy in his second season? Because I think at any other club bar Tottenham, you maybe get away with that. But for a club that hasn't won a trophy in the last 17, 18 years, I mean, it just felt the minute those words left his mouth, it was almost like, no. I mean, what do you think, John, of that? Do you think if he had his time again, would he have insinuated that and doubled down? I mean, again, it was an interviewer that at one point pulled the microphone away from him. He pulled it back towards him and you just thought, this isn't going to end well.
I don't know. I just think if he wins the trophy, you don't regret it. If he has a good crack at it, and they get to the final, and it's one of those. You can always argue, just being ambitious. If you're not ambitious, if you're not in the business of winning trophies, then what are you there for? I know everyone's fixated in this new era, the Champions League, top fours above all, and we've had this discussion before. But I remember Spurs getting the Champions League and going to Champions League very, very well, and these are glorious memories. But I remember 1984. I genuinely, it's one of my favourite memories as a young football fan, watching that team play and win. You'll remember Aberdeen in 1983 winning a Winners' Cup against Real Madrid. These are things that go beyond that. So if you're not in the business of trying to win a trophy, what are you doing? Particularly a club like Spurs, and it is ridiculous. That's 17 years. That with Alan Hutton in that team.
I know.
Yeah, I remember. Yeah,
I've aged. I'll tell you what, John.
17 years. Jeez.
Yep.
Oh,
I know.
I've still got the newspaper clipping of that winning match under that sofa there.
Yeah, so if you're not in the business of winning trophies, we talked about this before, like the NFL equivalents of the Dallas Cowboys, They like to show that they're all in every year. Oh yeah, we're going for the Super Bowl, but they're not really.
No,
they're not spending the money that it takes.
No,
they're just to be flashy and to be America's team. And you sometimes feel that with over the years, Spurs has been, well, we're just spending enough to get in that top 4 and get to the Champions League, and that gets more money and stuff like that. It's like, yeah, you want to win a trophy as well, right? Come on. That's what you're in the game for, those moments.
And do you think then, John, from an outside perspective, if Ange was to go on and win the Europa League, in your view, does that make him the most successful manager Spurs have had in 18 years?
I suppose
and
so,
could it be a bizarre situation where the most successful manager in 18 years for Spurs on paper? Also, actually, another question. I had engaged with a lot of the kind of Ange community, and by that I mean like fans who followed Ange rather than necessarily the club he's managing at that time. And one of them said to me, and it was like the most liked comment in a video, it said, you don't realize if he wins a trophy, you lot of ground him down so much, he'll probably walk away from you. And I think a lot of people in the comments will be going, brilliant, that's the exact outcome I want. But it would kind of be the most Spurs thing as well, wouldn't it, Ricky? That technically the most successful manager in our history walks out on us and we're all delighted at the idea of it. What a bizarre situation. Well, not all of us, I wouldn't be, but
yeah,
you know what I mean? Like, it would be quite...
You know what? It's similar, Jim, and I'll let John come in on this point. It's similar to if Pochettino won the Champions League with Tottenham, you could understand that point why he probably thought it's game over, because after you win the Champions League with Tottenham, I mean, you've completed life as a Tottenham manager. Yeah. I mean, where'd you go from there?
Well,
it's
Real
intriguing.
Madrid.
Real Madrid. But in terms of Tottenham, you're done, aren't you? I mean, what do you do after that? Really? I mean, what do you think, John?
You turn Football Manager off.
Yeah, you do.
Yeah, you do. I've completed it.
Save that one. Yeah.
What do you think on that point?
Because I mean, he's like me, he's nearer 60 than 50. It's not exactly. Maybe there is another option out there that he just says, look, there's the trophy. It's been fun. And then, well, if nothing else, he puts it in the boardroom and says, so Mr. Levy, about this transfer window, what are we getting in? Are we getting someone to help us win another trophy next year and maybe have a go at the Premier League? And it gives you a great bargaining position. But yeah, maybe that's quite an interesting scenario. Maybe just put the trophy down and say, I'm off to to do something entirely different now, another club, or maybe the Greece job, or one of these things. He's always had a hankering, I think, for that, for his back to the family roots. And Greece are a pretty good side, as Scotland proved the other night.
Yeah. We won't bring that up, John. We won't upset you too much. We have to let's ask you the point then. I mean, I know Jim's got a couple of questions to kind of close on, but I just wonder for you, John, do you think this will be Ange's final season at Tottenham?
Cool, that's a trick. Don't think so. No, I just don't get the vibes. But then I'm a long way away from it and seeing it second hand, third hand. Listen, it'll come down to these next 10 games or whatever it is, won't it? That'll decide it, and it's always the way. And I don't think there's many managers who are more than 10 games away from losing their job in the Premier League anyway.
You think, John, I'm just intrigued to know, you think even if he wasn't to win the Europa League and we were to see an uplift in the final 9 games of the season, you could see a scenario where Ange is the Spurs manager going into the next season? The reason why I ask you that is that we're entering then the final year, I believe. Tell me if I'm wrong here, Jim. I think we're entering the final year of his current contract, and therefore you would feel Spurs have got a decision to make in terms of whether they would offer Ange an extension. Don't kill me out there for those that might not like that suggestion. Or whether they allow that year to play out. That's why I'm intrigued to know, because it feels like when we come to the end of this season, it feels like there's a decision to make. We're going into potentially, I think, the final year of his contract. There might be an option there to extend, or, does he leave? It's just intriguing. I'd love to, for someone that's covered him for such a long time the way you have, the thing that I'm really, really, I think at the moment at a loss with Ange is that I watched a video the other day with the Celtic fans, and he had such a connection with them upon winning the trophies that he did, where he absolutely was, in love with those supporters. They worshipped him right until the day that he left. And he was back actually in Greece earlier this week, where he was pictured with a fan here. It's probably the first I've seen Ange smile in the last 3-4 months. He's adored, obviously, for what he did up in Celtic in Scotland, of course. Does he need all this, John? Does he need all this? Do you think he goes back to somewhere where he is loved and adored? Because, I know, again, for a lot of Australian viewers and listeners, he is seen as one of the most successful people to come out of soccer, football in that country. Does he need this at Tottenham? Does he need to go through this?
But that's what drives football people, isn't it? And we discussed this often. English football is the mothership for him. It's what he grew up watching and idolizing. And even, okay, we know the Premier League's the place to be anyway. It's the world's biggest league, yada, yada. But it just means so much to him, the fact that he's managing there. And in this place, gave football to the world. And those nights he had with his dad, his dad would wake him up in the middle of the night to sit up and watch football, from England, inevitably the time difference, whatever it was, and those were those special bonding moments. You don't just, those things go so deep that you can't just because it's a bit uncomfortable. And I would hate to, you can almost imagine him saying, God, what would my dad say if I turned around and said, oh, Dad, I'm not really enjoying this much?
Yeah.
Jim would have said, well, just stick at it, mate. Jim was notoriously tough. His dad was a real, that first generation immigrant out there making a life. And as Ange always said, he didn't go there to make a better life for himself. He went out there to make a better life for him and his sister, and he was driven that way. So that is a huge part of who he is as well.
But do you think, just on this point before Jim comes back in, I have to ask this, John, he did walk away from the Australia job.
Yeah.
So, again, this is a very unique situation where at the moment, and Jim, you back me up if you feel you want to back me up on this, it feels from a lot of Tottenham fans, he's unappreciated right now, just generally in that stadium. His name hasn't been sung. I think you have to go back to when he beat Southampton, was it 5-0 away from home back in December. I don't think Ange is used to this scenario in terms of being so, how do I put this without being disrespectful? Not disliked, but unappreciated by fans at the moment, given the nature of results and performances. I just wonder if there's someone of his age that, again, is loved, by certain parts of the world for what he's done in other countries, where he just thinks, you know what, John, I don't need this now in my career. I don't need this. I understand what you say about his dad. Again, I actually listened to some of that stuff back today. You're right. His dad might just say, stick with his son. He would have maybe said, stick with this. But at the same time, does he need it at this age? He looks like he's age 20. I don't know if he's rude to him. When you look when he first came to the job to what he looks like now, I mean, Jim has seen it as well. He looks like every Spurs manager in the last 18 months. They go looking so fresh and so happy. To come into the end, they look an absolute quivering Rick.
Yeah. I don't know. It's interesting. Yeah, maybe there is a time when you just say, I'll go do something else. But I mean, realistically, we do. I mean, it's not like the Socceroos job. They've just got Tony Popovich is just in the door there. So that's not going to be available, even if he fancied another crack at that. There's very little things that could match the luster and the glamour and the challenge of managing Tottenham Hotspur in the Premier League. It's just, I mean, it is. It's what, not blowing smoke. It's one of the glamour clubs. It always has been, and particularly for someone who grew up on English football. He's near enough. He's about a year older than me. I go through that same thing. You remember Spurs? I mean, Spurs were always had that little excitement about them. So there's that element. He picked the team very well when it came up. When that came up, that was the reason. I don't think he would have jumped at certain other clubs in the Premier League.
Interesting.
Because you say he was leaving Celtic, but he has been very good at moving when it's time to move. That has been part of it, and people have talked about that. When it's right for him, he goes. And he's had players signing to come from Europe to Australia, and they turn up, and he's like, right, I'm off to Japan now. Gaffer, I've moved halfway across the world for you. Sorry, mate. It's football, and that they don't understand that's what happens, eh? So if it was right for him and something came up,
he does seem to like to punch up, not down. Which is kind of where I see like a massive difference. And people will say, you can't compare him to Pep Guardiola. One's the greatest. I'm not comparing them in managerial ability. I'm comparing them on personality. I get the impression, and I put Klopp in a similar personality camp to Ange, where they will always take on the underdog over taking on the behemoth at the top. And Ange, but you spoke about it in your book, John, when Ange said, my favorite bit is when everything's kind of going wrong, but it's about to click and everyone's doubting me and everyone's saying it's not going to work. I guess what's different at Spurs is we've thought that click moment's coming for about 12 months and fans have gone, it's not clicking, bail, jump ship. And I think that's where a lot of fans are. But I did want to just quickly ask you a question for Time's Up, because there has been a moment in his career before, I think you mentioned it in your book as well, where he was kind of a couple of games away from possibly losing his job. And there was a kind of the game was kind of salvaged late on, and he did kind of pull it back. So he has been here before, right? In that sense.
Oh yeah. South Melbourne, really early on. And he, first of all, he had to fight to get that job because he was just the interim. And nobody was even considering him for the job. And he was working part-time in a bank, and he had to fight to get that job, but he was close. He was this close, and everyone has said it 1,000 times. They'd have lost away to Newcastle. Was it Newcastle? Can't remember the team now. But if they'd lost away there, that was it. That was he was gone. Forget about it. Last minute goal, win the game, and from there on they took off. And the start of his time at Brisbane, they had a terrible time as well. And then they went on set this unbeaten record that hadn't been matched in Australian sports for, I don't know if it still stands as the record, but it was at the time of the book. It was the longest unbeaten run in Australian sports. So he's been through that before. I think what threw us all this time is those first 10 games or so. It just went, whoa, that's absolutely, and that was not what had happened anywhere he'd been.
And John, you said that shouldn't have. And John, you also said when you came on here, it shouldn't have happened. It shouldn't have happened because it almost was reversed as to what we was expecting at the time.
Yeah, even at Celtic, I vividly remember it. There was a few. I'm not really sure about this, and they're up at Aberdeen, and they're playing, and eventually they get the ball through their final third entry in the cutback. Eventually, it falls to Callum McGregor instead of Greg Taylor, and Callum McGregor scores, and there's a win, and everyone. And as he said at the time, that made the players believe, not so much the fans. It made the players believe, okay, if we just keep playing. So he's been through these situations before. You get to his stage in management, there's very little he hasn't seen. there's very few mistakes he hasn't made. Will he admit himself? He made lots of mistakes when he was a younger manager and as an older manager as well, because that's what happens. And he's hopefully learning lessons.
It's fascinating. It is fascinating. I got to say, it's been a really fascinating show. And I know, again, I think me and Jim have probably just scratched the surface. There's so much more we can ask you, John, but there is time pressing against us. It's been a really, really fascinating show. And again, we obviously will see how this does pan out in the soap opera that is Tottenham, because just when you think you're done, something could surprise us all. Spurs, of course, are in, of course, those quarterfinals of the Europa League. And as we go back to that point, if Ange Postecoglou was to win that, he would be Tottenham's most successful manager since 1984, which would maybe leave a massive dilemma for the summer as to what the plan is. You'll be pleased to know I'll be going on holiday in the summer, so hopefully I won't have to have that debate for the 2 weeks that all does take place, and I'll be away trying to sun myself chasing around 2 kids in 40-degree heat. So I'll let you. I wonder who's the winner there. It might not be me. John,
you can get the kids dressed up in the Holston shirts with Archibald on the back. You know.
Well, it'll be Ange one on the back or Ange. I don't know what it will be. I'll be chased out of town by the Australians, bless their hearts. John, a final one for you. If Postecoglou is to depart from Tottenham, I'm just intrigued to know, where do you see maybe his next destination being? Can you even fathom where he may go next or what he might do in his career?
No, I think he's still built up a huge body of work, so that's an element of it, isn't there? He would still be in demand, just because, as we've said repeatedly, I think a number of times in this show, it's Hollywood rules, isn't it? Nobody knows anything really.
No.
The people that run football clubs. So if you have a bit of success, they give you more money to go somewhere else and try and do something different with it. So he'd still get offers and interest. And I always feel that going back to Greece would be of interest to him, just because it kind of squares the circle for the family. And going back there, and although his previous experience in Greek football, as detailed in the book, was a little bit chaotic and ended with them dashing to the airport with his pocket full of euros. Let's get the hell out of here. So maybe not the club scene, but if there was an international job, or if something came up, or maybe he will have earned the right to become a director of football somewhere, kind of professor emeritus of Australian soccer or Asian soccer, because he's you got to forget that we talk about it in the book, but he represents Australia, he represents Japanese football as well. They still love him there. Asian football is seen as having revolutionized the entire Asian football scene. Brendan Rodgers has come back to Celtic once, so if he gets fed up and leaves, maybe Ange could go back to Celtic again. Who knows?
Well, you make that point, John, and before we close, I think that's a really important point that I've stressed on the shows that we've had on Last Word on Spurs, that I'm really uncomfortable by any kind of abuse towards the man. Look, you can dislike the results, the performances. You can dislike the fact that he's our manager. I just think there's a certain line not to cross. And I think the reality is that whatever people think about him, I think he's a good man. I think he does care. I think he has tried his utmost to make it work here. And just my feeling is maybe this job is potentially beyond him, but I would wish him all the very, very best wherever he goes, because he does play football the right way. I'm just not sure whether it can work here. Jim, I want to say a massive thank you to you. You do a great job over at Oso Spurs. Where can people find that? And I'm sure you agree, John's been a fabulous guest to have on and give us, again, some real insight into maybe what comes next for Tottenham in this Postecoglou project.
Yeah, it's been great to meet you, John. Really, really enjoyed speaking to you.
Brilliant.
Thanks. And I didn't think I could learn more about Ange, but I did after reading your book, which was great. So thank you for that. And I do think he's got unfinished business with the Australian national team. I do agree after reading that. I think he's going to go back and do something there. But yeah, you can find me on Oso Spurs on YouTube or X. So Jim Oso Spurs, or just Oso Spurs for the channel page. And then we're on all the audio pods as well. Haven't done as much content on there lately, but we do those as well. And we've just created an account on Blue Sky. I need to be more active on there, but I just, you know what it's like, families, Ricky, and juggling 20 apps. It's not healthy.
Absolutely. And juggling those kids as well can't be also healthy or possible. We try and do our best. Jim, it's been a real pleasure to share the screen with you. John, thank you so much. Look, we're acutely aware. We always say we don't know where this journey is going to go next, but it's been one of intrigue. I know for those that follow this club week in, week out and listen to Last Word on Spurs, it's probably been one of the most difficult seasons probably to have to not only watch the games but also listen to podcasts. So is there a parting message, John, to maybe give to those Spurs fans that you can give them some optimism that it's going to get better?
Oh, I'd love to be confident, mate, but it is football, and football is not a game of logic.
And it is Tottenham.
It's not a game of logic. Listen, the body of work suggests that he knows what he's doing. That's all you can say. Over the X number of clubs in X different countries, that he does know what he's doing. So if that counts for anything in football, then it should be all right. But we know football is rarely bound by the laws of physics.
Listen, we shall see what the next chapter of Ange Postecoglou has in store for us, of course, after that international break. And can Tottenham go all the way in the Europa League and go and secure a trophy in what has been a very difficult domestic season, but could still end successful? I want to say a massive thank you to Jim from Spurs. I want to say a massive thank you to the wonderful John Greechan. Of course, I've got to say that book is still available right now for those that are intrigued to know more about Ange Postecoglou. John is still going to, he doesn't know, but it's still out there to buy right now. Maybe for those that are interested. It's been a pleasure having John on the show since, of course, Ange has been appointed. We'll see how that journey ends up. From our watching viewers and listeners, we've had over nearly 4,000, 5,000 of you watching the show live. Thank you so much for your incredible support. We're back with you for more feature edition shows during this international break. So, guys, keep on believing, keep on hoping, keep on praying. Let's see where Spurs do go next in this quest of a soap opera that is our football club. From Jim, from John, from me, we've been the last one on Spurs. Please keep safe, keep well, and as always, come on, you Spurs.